Welcome to Beyond the Pull Request, Navigating the Shift to Engineering Manager. I'm Stephen, and with me is Edith. This podcast explores one of the most consequential yet poorly understood career transitions in tech, the move from individual contributor to engineering manager. We're here because there's a story engineers tell themselves about management, the promise of leverage and impact, and then there's the story they tell each other after they've lived it, the long feedback loops, the loneliness of accountability, and the unseen work that keeps teams from quietly falling apart. We weave together public accounts from Reddit threads, long-form blog posts, and leadership essays to surface what this transition actually feels like on the ground.
Today, we're diving into the heart of that contradiction, the gap between expectation and reality when engineers first step into management roles. We'll explore 3 critical reality shocks that consistently surface in these stories: the disappearance of the dopamine loop that drives most IC work, the complete transformation of how time and attention get fragmented, and, perhaps most painfully, the identity shift that leaves new managers questioning their daily value and impact.
These aren't just growing pains we're talking about. Understanding this expectation gap is crucial because it explains why so many promising engineers struggle in their first management roles, why some retreat back to IC work, and why organizations often fail to properly support this transition. The patterns we'll discuss today set the stage for everything else we'll explore in this series.
Let's start with a story that captures this beautifully. Ava, a senior engineer with about 10 years of experience, gets tapped to manage a team of 7 people. Her expectation? A hybrid role where she'd fix broken processes, still write code, and unblock bigger decisions for her team.
That sounds reasonable, even appealing. The classic player-coach model that many engineers envision when they think about management.
Exactly. But 3 months later, her post in a developer forum reads like a complete reality check. She's overwhelmed. The pay bump she got was only about 10%, but her responsibilities now include handling underperformance issues, managing cross-team prioritization conflicts, and, here's the kicker, managing people in domains she's never shipped code in before.
That last point is particularly telling. As an IC, your authority and credibility come largely from technical expertise. You know the codebase, you understand the architecture, you can debug the hardest problems. But as a manager, you're suddenly responsible for people working on systems you might never have touched.
It's like being promoted from being a skilled surgeon to running the entire hospital. The skills that made you excellent at surgery, precision, deep focus, technical mastery, don't automatically translate to understanding patient flow, managing staff schedules, or coordinating with insurance companies.
Diego, another senior EM at a consumer tech company, captured this shift perfectly. As an IC, he said work just flowed naturally. You'd pick up a ticket, write code, test it, ship it. There's a clear beginning, middle, and end to most tasks.
But as a manager, he barely knew where to start each day. And this gets to our first major reality shock, the complete disappearance of what we might call the dopamine loop that drives most IC work.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by the dopamine loop?
Think about the IC workflow. You write code, run tests, see them pass. Immediate feedback. You fix a bug, deploy to production, see the error rates drop. Satisfaction within hours. You implement a feature, get it reviewed, merged, released, tangible progress you can point to and say, I built this.
It's like playing a video game with constant level ups and achievement unlocks.
Exactly. But management operates on completely different timescales. As one EM put it, you can't run your management decisions and get a test pass in 10 minutes. It can take weeks to know if a policy change was right, months to see if a hire was successful, quarters to determine if a strategic direction is working.
This temporal mismatch creates a profound disorientation. Engineers are used to rapid iteration cycles, quick feedback, and the ability to correct course almost immediately. Management decisions exist in this much longer feedback loop where the results of your choices might not be visible for months.
And it's not just about timescales. The nature of the work itself becomes fundamentally different. An EM at Venmo described it as moving from concrete deliverables to abstract outcomes. Instead of shipping features, you're shipping team culture. Instead of fixing bugs, you're fixing communication patterns.
Which brings us to our second reality shock, the complete fragmentation of time and attention. A former CTO who moved back to being an IC described a manager's day as profoundly fragmented.
Let's unpack that. As an IC, you have what we call maker schedule. You block out hours for deep work, you get into flow states, you can hold complex problems in your head for extended periods. Interruptions are generally bad because they break that flow.
But managers operate on what's essentially a manager's schedule. High availability, rapid context switches, endless synchronous communication, very little deep work time.
It's like the difference between being a novelist and being an emergency room doctor. The novelist needs long, uninterrupted stretches to develop complex ideas and maintain narrative threads. The ER doctor needs to be constantly available, switching rapidly between different patients and problems, making quick decisions with incomplete information.
And many new managers try to maintain their old working style while taking on management responsibilities. They block out time for coding, but then that time gets consumed by urgent people issues, escalated technical decisions, or cross-functional meetings that only they can attend.
Which creates this constant feeling of being behind, of never having enough time to do either role well. The technical work suffers because you're constantly interrupted, and the management work suffers because you're trying to squeeze it into the gaps.
This leads us to perhaps the most disorienting reality shock, the identity crisis that many new managers experience. Ben, a new EM, wrote that the most challenging part was ending most days wondering, what did I actually accomplish?
This hits at something fundamental about how engineers derive professional satisfaction. As an IC, your value is largely individual and tangible. You can point to code you wrote, problems you solved, systems you designed. Your GitHub commits are a literal record of your productivity.
But as a manager, success becomes much more distributed and often invisible. You succeed when your team succeeds, but that success might be the result of dozens of small interventions, conversations, and decisions that nobody else sees.
Think of it like being a film director versus being a cinematographer. The cinematographer can point to specific, beautiful shots they captured. The director's contribution is in the overall vision, the way they guided performances, the thousand small decisions that shaped the final product. But it's much harder to point to and say, I did that.
And this shift from what I built to what my team built requires a fundamental reframing of how you measure your own value and impact. Some people make this transition smoothly, but for others, it's genuinely destabilizing.
What's particularly challenging is that this identity shift happens while you're still learning the actual mechanics of management. You're simultaneously trying to figure out how to run effective one-on-ones, navigate performance issues, and coordinate with other teams, all while questioning whether you're adding any value at all.
It's like learning to drive while also questioning whether cars are a useful form of transportation.
But here's what's important to understand. Underneath all this chaos, there's actually a predictable pattern that seasoned managers recognize. There's an initial destabilization period where everything feels wrong and overwhelming.
Then there's this long stretch where you're learning while carrying real responsibility. You can't just practice management in a safe sandbox. You're making decisions that affect real people's careers and real product outcomes while you're still figuring out what you're doing.
And if it sticks, if you push through that difficult learning period, there's eventually a reorientation around different sources of satisfaction. Instead of the immediate gratification of code that compiles, you start finding satisfaction in team clarity, in watching individuals grow, in sustained team output over quarters and years.
The key insight here is that this isn't just about adjusting expectations. It's about recognizing that management is genuinely a different career, not just a promotion within the same career. Diego's reframe was crucial. This isn't a linear promotion, it's a career change.
Which means that the skills, working styles, and sources of satisfaction that made you successful as an IC might actually work against you as a manager, at least initially. It's not that those skills are useless, but they need to be applied in completely different ways.
And organizations need to understand this too. You can't just promote your best IC and expect them to naturally figure out management. The transition requires different support, different metrics, different expectations, and frankly, different timelines for success.
What we've outlined today, the disappearing dopamine loop, the fragmented schedule, the identity crisis, these aren't signs of failure or weakness. They're predictable responses to a genuinely difficult transition. Recognizing these patterns can help new managers understand that their struggle is normal and temporary, not a sign that they're unsuited for the role.
In our next episode, we'll flip the perspective entirely. We'll explore what managers say actually breaks without them, the perceived value of management through the lens of the unseen work that keeps teams functioning. We'll look at 3 critical functions: the shock absorber role, decision enabling, and force multiplication. Because understanding what management actually provides is crucial for both new managers trying to find their value and ICs trying to understand whether this transition makes sense for them.
The paradox we'll explore is that the better a manager gets at their job, the more invisible their work becomes, until they're gone and the seams start to show. It's a fascinating exploration of how the most critical work in engineering management often happens in the background, completely invisible to the very people it benefits most.
Thanks for joining us for this first episode of Beyond the Pull Request. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to Beyond the Pull Request, navigating the shift to engineering manager. I'm Steven, and I'm here with Edith to dive deep into one of the most misunderstood aspects of the IC to EM transition.
Thanks for having me back. And, after our last episode where we explored that jarring reality check that new managers face, the disappearing dopamine loops, the fragmented calendars, the identity crisis, I kept thinking about a fundamental question that underlies all of that chaos.
What's that?
Why do we even need managers at all? I mean, if the transition is so difficult and the role seems to create more problems than it solves, what's the actual value? And more importantly, why is that value so hard to see?
That's fascinating, and it gets to the heart of today's episode. We're exploring what managers call the invisible work problem, the critical functions that engineering managers perform that are, paradoxically, most effective when they're completely invisible. Today, we'll unpack 3 core areas: the shock absorber function, the decision enabler role, and the concept of force multiplication. We'll also examine why this creates such a perception gap between ICs and EMs, and how understanding this invisible work is crucial for anyone considering the management track.
Exactly. And this builds directly on what we discussed last episode. Remember Ava's story, the senior engineer who became overwhelmed 3 months into management? Part of her struggle wasn't just learning new skills, it was discovering work that she never knew existed in the first place.
Right. So let's start with this fundamental tension. From an IC perspective, especially a senior IC perspective, what does management work look like from the outside?
Well, it often looks like meetings. Lots and lots of meetings. You see your manager in one-on-ones, in planning sessions, in stakeholder updates. From the outside, it can appear pretty abstract, talking about work rather than doing work. And when things are running smoothly, when the team is productive and hitting deadlines, it's natural to wonder, what exactly is my manager contributing here?
And that perception makes sense, because the most critical management work is designed to be invisible. Take what the stories call the shock absorber function. Can you walk us through what that actually means?
The shock absorber function is probably the most underappreciated aspect of engineering management. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine your team as a high-performance engine, and all the organizational chaos, budget cuts, priority changes, personnel issues, stakeholder conflicts as road debris flying toward that engine. The manager's job is to absorb that debris before it hits.
The story of Kai and FinTech really illustrates this. He spent weeks working to retain a key engineer. Back-channel escalations, compensation negotiations, HR processes. His team never saw any of this work, and when the engineer stayed, from their perspective, nothing happened.
Exactly, and that's the point. Nothing happened was the successful outcome. It's like a really good security system. You only notice it when it fails. But think about what would have happened if Kai hadn't done that invisible work. Suddenly, the team loses a critical contributor, project timelines shift, knowledge gets lost, morale takes a hit, and everyone's workload increases.
And this extends beyond just retention, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Performance issues are another huge area. When someone on the team is struggling, whether it's technical performance, communication problems, or just not fitting well with the team culture, the manager is often spending hours in coaching conversations, documenting issues, working with HR on improvement plans, all while trying to protect the rest of the team from the disruption and uncertainty.
So while the team sees a colleague who's maybe not pulling their weight, they don't see the manager working nights and weekends to either help that person succeed or, if necessary, manage them out of the organization as humanely as possible.
Right. And this confidential nature is actually essential. You can't coach someone effectively if you're broadcasting their struggles to the whole team. You can't negotiate retention packages if everyone knows someone's a flight risk. The invisible nature of this work isn't a bug, it's a feature.
This connects to the second critical function, the decision enabler role. This isn't about making all the decisions, but ensuring decisions actually get made. Can you break this down?
Think about it this way. In a well-functioning team, you have brilliant engineers with strong opinions about architecture, about priorities, about the right way to solve problems. And that's great. But what happens when those strong opinions conflict? What happens when product wants feature A, engineering thinks we need to pay down technical debt, and the customer success team is escalating about bug B?
Without someone in the decision enabler role, you get what the stories describe as prioritization standoffs.
Exactly. And here's what's interesting. When teams try to self-manage, they often end up distributing this decision-enabling work to the ICs. Suddenly, senior engineers are spending their time in cross-functional alignment meetings, trying to facilitate consensus between teams, managing hiring pipelines. They're doing management work, but without the training, the organizational authority, or often the full context needed to do it well.
Mira's quote really captures this. If you remove managers, someone still has to coordinate dependencies, resolve prioritization standoffs, and ensure decisions get made. The work doesn't disappear, it just gets pushed to people who aren't equipped for it.
And that's where you see the dropped balls the stories mention. Hiring pipelines stall because no one owns the process end to end. Cross-functional projects get stuck because there's no one with the authority and context to break ties. Performance issues fester because individual contributors don't have the training or the organizational backing to address them properly.
So the manager isn't necessarily the one making every decision, but they're ensuring the decision-making process works smoothly.
Exactly. It's like being a traffic controller at a busy intersection. You're not dictating where each car goes, but you're managing the flow so everyone gets where they need to go without crashes. And when that system works well, it's invisible. Traffic just flows. It's only when the lights go out that you realize what was happening behind the scenes.
This leads us to the third critical function, force multiplication. This concept seems to get to the heart of what effective management actually produces.
Force multiplication is really the ultimate goal of all this invisible work. It's about creating systems and conditions that make the entire team more effective than the sum of its parts. But this is probably the hardest concept for individual contributors to grasp because it's so abstract.
How so?
Well, as an IC, your contribution is usually pretty direct and measurable. You write code, you fix bugs, you implement features. The connection between your work and the outcome is clear. But a manager's contribution is systemic. They're working on the team's ability to work, not on the work itself.
Can you give us a concrete example of what that looks like?
Sure. Let's say you have a team that's constantly getting blocked waiting for code reviews. An IC might work around this by finding someone to review their code faster, or maybe they'll review more code themselves to help reduce the backlog. That's solving the immediate problem, but it's not fixing the system.
Whereas a manager approaches this as a system problem.
Exactly. They might implement review rotation schedules, set up tooling to automatically assign reviewers, establish SLAs for review turnaround, or even identify that the real issue is unclear coding standards that make reviews take longer. They're not necessarily doing any of the reviews themselves, but they're creating conditions where reviews happen more efficiently across the entire team.
And the result is that everyone gets unblocked faster, but it's hard to point to any single action the manager took and say, that's what fixed it.
Right. And this extends to hiring, to goal setting, to technical decision-making processes, to stakeholder relationships. Experienced managers describe their job as working on the system rather than in it. They're constantly looking for patterns, for recurring bottlenecks, for structural improvements that can benefit everyone.
The stories mention that leaders call themselves multipliers. What does that mean in practice?
A multiplier is someone whose impact extends far beyond their individual contribution. If you're a 10x engineer, you're producing 10 times the output of a typical engineer. But if you're a good manager of 10 engineers, you're not trying to be a 10x engineer yourself. You're trying to help each of your team members become more effective.
So instead of 1x manager plus 10x individual output, you might get 1.5x output from each team member because of better processes, clearer goals, fewer blockers.
Exactly. And that math is powerful. Even small improvements in team effectiveness, say 20% better velocity because of fewer interruptions or 15% better code quality because of improved review processes, compound across the entire team. That's force multiplication.
But here's where we run into the perception problem again. This kind of systematic improvement happens gradually, often invisibly, and it's hard to attribute to any specific management action.
That's the paradox we mentioned earlier. The better the manager, the smoother things run, the less visible their contribution becomes. It's like a really good sound engineer at a concert. You don't notice them until something goes wrong, and then you really notice them.
This creates a challenging dynamic for new managers, doesn't it? They're transitioning from a role where their contributions were highly visible and immediately measurable to a role where effectiveness is often inversely correlated with visibility.
Absolutely. And this connects back to the identity crisis we discussed last episode. Ben, the new EM who ended most days wondering, what did I actually accomplish? He was struggling with this exact issue. His value was shifting from what I built to what conditions I created for others to build.
And the cruel irony is that the more successful he becomes at creating those conditions, the less obvious his contribution becomes, even to himself.
Right, because good management often feels like not management. When things are running smoothly, when the team is productive and happy, when projects are hitting their deadlines, it can feel like the manager isn't really needed. But try removing them and see what happens.
The story suggests that this is where the seams start to show. Can you elaborate on that?
When you remove effective management, you don't immediately see a dramatic failure. Instead, you see a gradual degradation. Communication gets a little less clear, priorities become a bit more ambiguous, small conflicts that used to get resolved quietly start to fester, the hiring pipeline slows down because no one's owning it end to end.
It's like removing the maintenance from a complex system. Everything works fine at first, but slowly, problems accumulate.
Exactly. And by the time the problems become visible and urgent, you're often in crisis mode. Suddenly, everyone realizes how much work was being done behind the scenes to prevent exactly these kinds of problems.
This has implications for how organizations think about management effectiveness, doesn't it? If the best management is often invisible, how do you measure it?
That's a great question, and it's one of the reasons why management can be undervalued in engineering organizations. We're great at measuring code output, bug fix rates, feature delivery, but how do you measure number of conflicts prevented, or amount of organizational chaos absorbed, or quality of hiring decisions that won't show their full impact for months?
The metrics exist, but they're lagging indicators. Team retention, velocity over time, quality of deliverables, employee engagement scores.
Right. And those metrics often reflect the cumulative effect of many invisible management decisions made months earlier. It's like judging a gardener by the health of the garden. You can see the results, but it's harder to trace back to the specific daily actions that created those results.
This also explains why first-time managers often struggle with their new role's ambiguity. They're used to clear, immediate feedback loops, and suddenly they're in a role where the most important work might not show results for months.
And where the absence of problems is often the sign of success. It's a completely different mindset. As an IC, you're solving problems that exist. As a manager, you're often preventing problems that would otherwise exist.
So for someone considering the transition to management, understanding this invisible work is crucial for setting realistic expectations.
Absolutely. If you go into management expecting the same kind of immediate visible impact you had as an IC, you're going to be frustrated and probably ineffective. But if you understand that your job is to create conditions for others to succeed, and that the better you do that job, the less visible your contribution becomes, then you can start to find satisfaction in different kinds of outcomes.
Team growth, improved processes, organizational health, long-term sustainability, rather than immediate deliverables.
Exactly. And this is why the stories emphasize that the transition to management isn't just a promotion, it's a career change. You're moving from being a direct contributor to being a force multiplier, from solving technical problems to solving people and process problems, from creating immediate value to creating sustainable value.
And the irony is that the organizations that most need this kind of invisible work are often the ones that have the hardest time recognizing and valuing it.
Right, because it requires a level of systems thinking that doesn't always come naturally in engineering cultures that are very focused on concrete, measurable outcomes. But the companies that figure this out, that understand how to recognize and reward good management, those are the ones that scale effectively and maintain their engineering culture as they grow.
As we wrap up, what's the key takeaway for our listeners, whether they're considering management or just trying to better understand what their managers actually do?
I think the key insight is that effective management is like effective infrastructure. When it's working well, you don't notice it. The shock absorption, the decision enabling, the force multiplication, all of this work is most successful when it's invisible. And that means we need to fundamentally shift how we think about management value. It's not about dramatic interventions or heroic saves. It's about creating steady, sustainable conditions for everyone else to do their best work.
And for new managers, embracing this invisible nature of the role, finding satisfaction in your team's success rather than your own visible contributions, that's often the key to both effectiveness and personal fulfillment in the role.
Exactly. It's a different kind of craftsmanship, but it's craftsmanship nonetheless.
Next episode, we'll dive deeper into the practical side of this transition. We'll explore how the actual day-to-day skills shift from code to conversations, what transferable skills ICs bring to management, and perhaps most importantly, what habits successful ICs need to actively unlearn to become effective managers. The journey from technical problem solver to people leader requires more than just adding new skills. It often means fundamentally changing how you think about your role and your impact.
Until then, thanks for listening to Beyond the Pull Request, navigating the shift to engineering manager.
Welcome back to Beyond the Pull Request, navigating the shift to engineering manager. I'm Steven, and I'm here with my co-host Edith. In our last episode, we explored the invisible work that managers do, the shock absorber function, decision enabling, and force multiplication that often goes unnoticed until it's gone. Today, we're diving into something equally critical but more tangible, the fundamental shift in skills and mindset that happens when you move from writing code to managing people.
That's right. We're talking about the transition from code to conversations, from shipping features to shipping team outcomes. And here's what makes this particularly fascinating. Most engineering managers don't just wake up one day and decide to become managers. There's usually a progression, a runway that leads to this moment. Today, we'll examine what that path typically looks like, how your daily work transforms overnight, which of your existing skills transfer over, and perhaps most importantly, what you need to consciously unlearn.
Before we dig in, let's set the stage with something that might surprise listeners. The journey to engineering management isn't random. There's a pattern here. Most first-time EMs come from senior engineer or tech lead roles, and the progression is surprisingly consistent. You start as a senior developer who mentors others and leads projects, then you become an unofficial tech lead, and finally you transition to formal manager of a small team. What's fascinating is how this progression naturally reduces your coding time until the management title feels almost inevitable.
Exactly. One manager we spoke with, Noah, described his final months as a tech lead as 0 to 5% code. He was spending his time unblocking team members, conducting architecture reviews, and sitting in meetings. By the time the formal management opportunity came up, he said the title change felt inevitable. The work had already shifted. The title was just catching up to reality.
This brings us to the heart of today's discussion. When you make that formal transition, 4 fundamental aspects of your work change immediately and dramatically. Let's start with the most jarring one. Your primary output completely transforms. As an individual contributor, your success is measured in features shipped, bugs fixed, and pull requests merged. These are concrete, visible deliverables that you can point to at the end of each day or sprint.
But as an engineering manager, your primary output becomes team velocity, organizational clarity, hiring outcomes, the growth and development of your people, and identifying and retiring risks before they become problems. Think of it like this. As an IC, you're a craftsperson creating beautiful furniture piece by piece. As a manager, you become the workshop foreman, responsible for ensuring the entire operation runs smoothly, that apprentices are learning, that tools are maintained, and that the workshop can handle bigger and more complex projects over time.
That analogy perfectly captures the second major shift, the feedback loop. As an individual contributor, you get feedback on your work in minutes to days. You write code, run tests, get code review comments, see your feature in production. It's immediate and tangible.
As a manager, that feedback loop stretches to weeks or quarters. Did that difficult conversation with a struggling team member actually help them improve? You might not know for months. Was that hiring decision good? You'll find out over the next year. Did restructuring the team's processes improve their velocity and happiness? The data won't be clear for at least a few sprints. It's like tending a garden instead of cooking a meal. The results of your efforts unfold slowly over time.
The third shift is in your core daily activities. As an IC, your calendar might have some meetings, but large blocks are protected for deep work in code. Your flow state happens at your IDE, solving complex problems through implementation.
As a manager, your day becomes about unblocking others, conducting one-on-ones, managing stakeholder communications, facilitating prioritization decisions, and helping your team make better decisions. Instead of solving problems directly, you're creating the conditions for others to solve problems effectively. You're less like a surgeon performing operations and more like a hospital administrator, ensuring the surgeons have everything they need to do their best work.
Which leads to the fourth and perhaps most psychologically challenging shift, your relationship with technical decision-making. As an IC, you implement and decide. You're expected to have opinions, to dive deep, to be the person who figures out the right technical approach.
As a manager, your job becomes to guide and ask the right questions while deliberately avoiding being the technical decision maker by default. This is crucial because when managers consistently make technical decisions, they rob their team members of growth opportunities and create bottlenecks. The goal is to develop your team's technical judgment, not to be their technical oracle.
Now, this transition might sound overwhelming, but here's the encouraging part. Many of your existing skills do transfer over. They just get applied in different contexts. The systems thinking you developed debugging complex distributed systems, that applies directly to understanding organizational dynamics and process flows.
Absolutely. Your fluency with trade-offs, understanding performance implications, architectural decisions, technical debt management, this translates beautifully to organizational trade-offs. Should we hire 2 junior developers or 1 senior developer? Should we prioritize this technical improvement or that customer feature? The thinking patterns are remarkably similar. You're still weighing costs, benefits, and long-term implications.
Cross-functional navigation is another skill that transfers directly. As a senior engineer, you learn to translate engineering constraints into product impact language, to communicate with designers about technical limitations, to work with operations teams on deployment strategies.
Think of it like being a translator who already speaks multiple dialects of the same language family. You understand the engineering perspective deeply, but you've also learned to communicate across functional boundaries. As a manager, you're doing the same translation work, but now you're also helping your team members develop those same translation skills.
Pattern recognition is perhaps the most directly transferable skill. As an engineer, you learn to spot recurring issues, maybe slow database queries that always happen during peak traffic, or integration bugs that emerge whenever a particular service gets updated.
As a manager, you apply that same pattern spotting ability to team and process issues. You start noticing when code reviews consistently take too long, when tickets are regularly unclear, when ownership boundaries cause confusion. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of just fixing the immediate problem, you're looking for structural solutions. You're debugging the system of how work gets done, not just individual work items.
This brings us to what might be the most critical part of this transition, the skills you need to consciously unlearn. And the biggest one is what many new managers call being the hero.
This is such a common trap, and it makes perfect sense why it happens. Picture this scenario. There's a production issue, the team is struggling to find the root cause, and you, having seen this type of problem before, know exactly what to look for. The heroic instinct is to grab the keyboard, dive in, and solve it yourself. You could fix it in 20 minutes instead of spending an hour coaching someone else through the solution.
But here's why that heroic instinct becomes destructive in a management role. When you consistently jump in to solve problems directly, you rob your team members of learning opportunities. They start to depend on you as the problem solver instead of developing their own debugging skills. You become a bottleneck where all difficult decisions flow through you.
It's like being a parent who always ties their child's shoes because it's faster than teaching the child to do it themselves. In the short term, you get the immediate result you want, but in the long term, you've created dependency instead of capability. The child never learns to tie their own shoes, and you're stuck tying shoes forever.
The managers who successfully make this transition learn to coach and delegate, even when they could do the work faster themselves. They ask questions like, "What do you think might be causing this?" Or "Where would you start investigating?" Or "What have we learned from similar issues in the past?" instead of diving straight into solution mode.
This coaching approach serves multiple purposes. First, it develops your team's problem-solving capabilities. Second, it ensures that knowledge doesn't stay trapped in your head. The team builds collective expertise. Third, it frees you up to work on higher-level problems that only you can solve, like strategic planning, organizational issues, and stakeholder management.
But let's be realistic about this transition. It's not easy, and the adjustment period can be genuinely difficult. Many new managers describe a sense of loss when they step away from hands-on coding. There's something deeply satisfying about building something concrete, about seeing your code work, about that moment when a complex algorithm finally clicks into place.
That sense of loss is completely normal and valid. You're grieving the loss of something you were really good at, something that gave you professional identity and daily satisfaction. It's like a master craftsperson becoming a teacher. You're not creating the beautiful objects anymore, but you're enabling others to create beautiful objects. The impact is ultimately greater, but the satisfaction is different.
The key insight here is that successful engineering managers don't completely abandon their technical skills, they recalibrate them. They stay technical enough to maintain credibility with their team and to contribute to strategic technical decisions, but they resist the urge to be the decider or fixer of last resort for day-to-day technical problems. Think of it as moving from being a player coach to being a true coach. A basketball coach might demonstrate techniques during practice and have deep knowledge of the game, but during the actual game, they're on the sidelines, making strategic decisions and helping players perform at their best. They're not trying to grab the ball and score themselves.
This shift from code to conversations represents a fundamental change in how you create value. As an IC, you create value through your direct output, the features you build, the bugs you fix, the systems you design. As a manager, you create value through other people's output by removing their blockers, providing clarity on priorities, helping them grow their skills, and creating an environment where they can do their best work.
And this is where we see the connection to our previous episode about the invisible work of management. Remember those 3 critical functions we discussed? The shock absorber, the decision enabler, and force multiplication? These emerge directly from this shift in skills and mindset. When you stop being the person who implements solutions and start being the person who enables others to implement solutions, you naturally start doing that behind-the-scenes work that keeps everything running smoothly.
What makes this transition particularly challenging is that success becomes less visible and takes longer to achieve. When you shipped a feature as an IC, you could see it in the product immediately. When you help a team member grow their debugging skills, it might be months before you see the full impact of that investment. When you implement a new process to improve team communication, the benefits compound slowly over time.
But here's what makes it rewarding. The potential impact is exponentially greater. Instead of your individual contribution, you're amplifying the contributions of your entire team. Instead of solving one problem, you're creating systems that prevent entire categories of problems. Instead of mentoring one person informally, you're formally responsible for the career growth and professional development of multiple people.
As we wrap up today's discussion, it's worth emphasizing that this transition from code to conversations isn't just about changing what you do. It's about changing how you think about creating value, how you measure success, and how you find professional fulfillment. The engineers who thrive in this transition are usually those who find genuine satisfaction in seeing others succeed and who enjoy the meta problem of improving how teams work together.
In our next episode, we'll dig into the practical side of making this transition successfully. We'll explore the preparation gap that many new managers face, what actually helps during those crucial first few months, and what doesn't. We'll look at the hardest parts of the transition, like managing former peers and dealing with the emotional labor of people management, and share specific tactics that experienced managers use to navigate these challenges. Until then, if you're considering this transition or in the middle of it, remember that moving from code to conversations isn't about losing your technical identity. It's about applying your technical thinking to the complex, fascinating system of how people work together to build great software. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Pull Request. Welcome to Beyond the Pull Request, navigating the shift to engineering manager. I'm Steven. And I'm joined by Edith as we continue our journey through the complex transition from individual contributor to engineering manager.
Hello, everyone. In our last episode, we explored how the fundamental skills shift when you move from writing code to leading people, from shipping features to enabling team velocity, from immediate feedback loops to longer-term outcomes. We talked about unlearning the hero instinct and learning to coach instead of grabbing the keyboard during crises.
Today, we're diving into something that many new managers wish they had known before they started: the preparation gap and the real challenges that await. It's one thing to understand theoretically that your role will change, but it's another to face the day-to-day reality of managing former peers, dealing with interpersonal conflicts, and letting go of the code you love. We'll be covering what preparation actually works, what the hardest parts really are, and practical navigation tactics that successful managers have developed.
This builds directly on our previous discussion, because once you understand that your skills need to shift, the natural question becomes, how do you prepare for that shift, and what challenges should you expect? The gap between knowing you need to change and actually navigating that change successfully is where many promising engineers stumble.
Let's start with the elephant in the room, the preparation gap. From what we see in the stories, many first-time managers report getting very little formal training. One manager, Lena, admitted she was Googling templates for one-on-ones and performance reviews. This seems to be a widespread issue. What's going on here?
It's a fascinating paradox, really. Companies will spend months interviewing and onboarding a senior engineer, ensuring they understand the code base, the deployment processes, the technical standards. But when that same engineer becomes a manager, often it's a title change and a pat on the back, with maybe a brief chat about new responsibilities. The assumption seems to be that if you're good at engineering, you'll naturally be good at managing engineers.
That assumption clearly doesn't hold up. The skills are fundamentally different, as we discussed last episode. So what does actually help when preparing for this transition?
Think of it like learning a new programming language, but one where the syntax is human psychology and the compiler errors are team conflicts. The most successful transitions seem to involve three key elements: mentorship, foundational knowledge, and practice opportunities.
Let's break those down. Mentorship appears to be particularly crucial. The stories mention finding mentorship inside the company but outside your chain of command. Why is that distinction important?
The positioning of the mentor is critical. You need someone who understands the company culture and internal politics, but who doesn't have a direct stake in your performance or team outcomes. It's like having a debugging partner who can look at your code with fresh eyes. They can spot issues you're too close to see. One manager wrote that a mentor saved me from despair in month 3, specifically for sanity checking tricky situations and navigating internal politics.
That timeline is interesting, month 3. It suggests there's a delayed reaction to the challenges. What about the knowledge component? There seems to be a small canon of books that managers repeatedly recommend.
There are 3 books that appear again and again in these stories. The Manager's Path by Camille Fournier gives you level-by-level expectations. It's like having a detailed specification document for what management looks like at each stage. Radical Candor by Kim Scott provides frameworks for the hardest conversations. Think of it as exception handling for interpersonal conflicts. And High Output Management by Andrew Grove teaches you to think in systems and metrics rather than just individual tasks.
These books seem to provide what formal training often lacks: concrete frameworks and scripts. But reading about management and actually doing it are different things. How important are those practice opportunities?
Absolutely critical. It's like the difference between reading about algorithms and actually implementing them. The most successful transitions involve what one manager called safe reps, acting as interim EM or tech lead, running OKRs, participating in hiring loops, managing on-call rotations. These experiences let you practice the mechanics of management while still having the safety net of not being the official decision maker.
That makes sense. But even with good preparation, there are still significant challenges. What are the hardest parts that new managers consistently struggle with?
The stories reveal 3 major pain points that seem to catch people off guard, even when they think they're prepared. First is managing former peers. This is like refactoring a critical system that's still in production. You have to change the fundamental relationships while keeping everything running.
The peer management challenge seems particularly thorny because it affects both the new manager and the team dynamics. What makes this so difficult?
It's a complete shift in social dynamics. Yesterday, you were grabbing lunch together and complaining about requirements. Today, you're setting their priorities and potentially affecting their compensation. The managers who handle this well address the power shift head-on, rather than pretending nothing has changed. They explicitly discuss new boundaries and actively work to find a new peer group of other managers.
That's a significant emotional adjustment. What's the second major challenge?
Emotional labor. Engineers are used to problems that have clear right and wrong answers. Your code either compiles or it doesn't. Your tests either pass or they fail. But suddenly, you're mediating between a PM who made an insensitive joke and a designer who was hurt by it, or helping a team member work through imposter syndrome. One new EM wrote, "Am I a kindergarten teacher?" after dealing with interpersonal conflicts all week.
That shift from objective technical problems to subjective human problems must be jarring. The skill set is completely different.
Exactly. In code, you can definitively say a function is correct or incorrect. With people, you're dealing with feelings, motivations, miscommunications, and cultural differences. There's rarely a single right answer, and the debugging process involves empathy and psychology rather than stack traces and logs.
And the third major challenge?
Letting go of code. This one seems to involve actual grief for many managers. They describe it as losing part of their identity. The pragmatic compromise is staying technical enough for credibility and strategic input, but resisting the urge to be the decider or fixer of last resort.
This connects back to our previous discussion about unlearning the hero instinct, but it sounds like it goes deeper than just changing behavior. It's about changing identity.
That's a profound observation. For many engineers, writing code isn't just what they do, it's who they are. The transition to management requires rebuilding your professional identity around enabling others rather than creating things yourself. It's like moving from being a craftsperson to being a workshop supervisor. The impact is broader, but the daily satisfaction is different.
Given these challenges, how do successful managers navigate them? Are there practical tactics that make a difference?
The successful managers develop what I think of as operational discipline, systematic approaches to managing their time, attention, and relationships. It's like having good coding practices, but applied to human systems instead of software systems.
What does that look like in practice?
3 key areas: calendar design, visible operating rhythm, and feedback systems. Calendar design means batching similar activities, grouping all your one-on-ones together so you're in coaching mode rather than context switching between technical and people problems. It also means being explicit about meeting purposes, including no decision agendas when you're just gathering information.
The no decision agenda is interesting. That seems like it would prevent a lot of frustration and wasted time.
Exactly. People come to meetings with different expectations. If everyone knows up front that this meeting is for information gathering or brainstorming rather than decision-making, it changes how they participate and what they expect as outcomes.
What about visible operating rhythm?
This is about creating predictability and transparency in how you work. Successful managers share weekly priorities, maintain visible risks lists, and importantly, they publish a "what we're not doing" section. This last piece is crucial because it sets expectations both upward with leadership and downward with the team about trade-offs and focus areas.
That "what we're not doing" list seems particularly valuable for managing scope and expectations. And the feedback systems?
This addresses the fundamental problem of the longer feedback loop in management. As an IC, you know within minutes or hours if your code works. As a manager, it might take weeks or months to know if your decisions were good. So successful managers create artificial feedback loops, regular skip levels with their team members' reports, anonymous pulse surveys, explicit check-ins about managerial effectiveness.
This seems like instrumenting your management practice the way you'd instrument a software system, creating observability into how things are actually working rather than how you think they're working.
That's a perfect analogy. You're building dashboards and alerts for team health, individual growth, and process effectiveness. The data might be qualitative rather than quantitative, but the principle is the same. You can't manage what you can't measure.
Looking at all of this, the preparation strategies, the challenges, the navigation tactics, what's the key insight for engineers considering this transition?
The transition to management is not a promotion in the traditional sense. It's a career change. It requires the same kind of deliberate learning and skill development as switching from front-end to back-end development or from web development to machine learning. You wouldn't expect to be immediately effective in a new technical domain without preparation and practice, and the same applies here.
That reframes the whole transition. Instead of seeing management as the next rung on the ladder, it's more like changing careers while staying within the same company.
Precisely. And like any career change, success depends on honest self-assessment, deliberate preparation, finding good mentors, and accepting that you'll have a steep learning curve. The engineers who struggle most are often those who expect their technical excellence to automatically translate to managerial excellence.
This sets up an important question about motivation and compensation. If management is essentially a career change with significant challenges and a steep learning curve, what drives people to make this transition? And how does the financial reality match the career investment?
That's exactly what we'll be exploring in our next episode. We'll dive into the complex world of management compensation, why many people are disappointed with their first management salary bump, the two-step strategy that many use to eventually reach compensation parity, and, more importantly, the non-financial motivations that keep people in management roles even when the pay doesn't immediately justify the stress.
We'll also look at the surprisingly common pattern of managers returning to IC roles and what that teaches us about career flexibility in engineering. It's not a one-way door, and understanding that can actually make the decision less fraught.
The key insight is that trying management and returning to IC work doesn't represent failure. It often makes people better engineers and better collaborators. We'll explore how that pendulum swing is not only normal, but can be strategically valuable for career development.
Until next time, remember that the transition from individual contributor to engineering manager isn't just about learning new skills. It's about building new systems for success in a fundamentally different role.
And that preparation, mentorship, and honest self-reflection can make the difference between a painful learning experience and a successful career transition. Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Pull Request.
Welcome back to Beyond the Pull Request, navigating the shift to engineering manager. I'm Steven, and with me as always is Edith. Today we're diving into one of the most sensitive yet crucial aspects of the IC to EM transition, something that influences every decision but rarely gets discussed openly in team meetings or company handbooks.
That's right. We're talking about compensation and motivation, what people actually got when they made the switch, and perhaps more importantly, what kept them in management roles or drove them back to individual contribution. After covering the preparation challenges in our last episode, it's time to address the elephant in the room that many companies and career guides dance around.
And here's what makes this topic particularly fascinating from an analytical standpoint. The financial incentives often don't align with what you might expect for such a significant career shift. Today, we'll explore the compensation patterns that emerge from real stories, examine the deeper motivations that drive people beyond salary considerations, and understand why the pendulum swing back to IC roles is not just normal, but often financially beneficial.
Before we dig in, let's acknowledge how this builds on our previous discussion about preparation challenges. Remember how we talked about the steep learning curve and the emotional labor that catches new managers off guard? Well, those challenges become even more complex when you factor in compensation disappointment. When someone takes on significantly more stress and responsibility for what might be a modest pay increase, it fundamentally changes how they evaluate their career satisfaction and long-term trajectory.
Exactly. So let's start with the numbers, because they tell a story that's both surprising and consistent across multiple data points. The compensation patterns for first-time engineering managers reveal a reality that's quite different from the traditional promotion narrative.
The data shows us something really striking. Modest internal raises are the norm, not the exception. We're talking about engineers who described taking roughly 10% increases for what they characterized as way more stress. The typical range appears to be 5 to 10% step-ups for first-time EM roles, and this pattern holds even for people who were already at staff-level IC positions.
That's a critical detail about staff-level ICs. These are engineers who have already reached significant technical leadership positions, often with substantial influence and compensation. When they transition to management, the financial incentive is often flat or minimal, which suggests the motivation has to come from somewhere else entirely.
Think of it like this. Imagine you're a master craftsperson who spent years perfecting your trade, earning recognition and good money for your specialized skills. Then, someone offers you a chance to run the workshop instead of working at the bench. The immediate financial gain might be small, but you're essentially changing careers entirely. The question becomes, what's driving that change?
And this is where we see the emergence of what several managers called the two-step. It's become a recognized pattern. Accept the smaller internal raise to get the title and crucial year of experience, then leverage that into an external move for a 20 to 45% compensation correction.
The two-step strategy reveals something important about how the market values management experience. Companies seem willing to pay significantly more for proven management skills than they are to invest in developing those skills internally. It's almost like the first year of management is an expensive MBA program that you pay for with opportunity cost rather than tuition.
From a systems perspective, this creates interesting incentives. The companies that invest in developing managers internally are essentially training talent that will likely be poached by competitors willing to pay market rates for experienced managers. It's a classic example of how individual rationality, taking the better external offer, conflicts with organizational interests.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The compensation story changes dramatically when we look at career trajectory. Multiple sources note that strong staff and principal ICs can equal or out-earn first-line managers. The management path typically becomes financially distinctive only from senior manager level onward. So, the decision to switch isn't just about immediate compensation, it's about which path offers better long-term financial prospects.
This brings us to a fundamental question about career path parity. For engineers considering the switch, they need to understand that the immediate financial incentive might be minimal or non-existent, and the long-term financial benefits depend on advancing beyond the first-line manager level. It's not a simple management pays more equation.
Now, there are exceptions to these patterns. Some people report 30 to 50% jumps when stepping into EM roles, but these tend to happen in hot markets or high-leverage organizations. The key insight is that these dramatic increases are less common and usually require either exceptional market conditions or moving to companies where management roles are particularly valued.
So if the immediate financial incentives are often disappointing, what actually motivates people to make and stick with the transition? The stories reveal several consistent themes that go well beyond compensation.
The most compelling motivation seems to be broader impact. Engineers describe the frustration of having good ideas that get ignored when they're individual contributors, then seeing those same ideas become practice when they have management authority. One story that stood out involved an engineer whose write tests recommendations were consistently ignored until he became a manager and could make it team policy.
That's the leverage narrative we keep seeing, the ability to change systems rather than just code. For engineers who have been in IC roles for years, there's often a point where they want to influence not just the technical solutions, but the processes, team dynamics, and product direction that shape those solutions.
It's like being a really skilled musician who realizes they want to conduct the orchestra instead of just playing their instrument beautifully. The skills are related but fundamentally different, and the impact is measured in completely different ways. Instead of perfecting individual performance, you're optimizing the collective output.
Another significant motivation is the new problem space. After years of solving similar technical challenges, some engineers crave what they describe as years of new stuff to learn: organizational design, hiring strategies, team dynamics, business strategy. It's essentially a career change that leverages existing context while introducing entirely new skill development opportunities.
This connects to something we discussed in earlier episodes about the transition being a new career rather than a promotion. For people who are intellectually curious and enjoy learning, management offers a completely different set of challenges. Instead of optimizing algorithms or architecting systems, you're optimizing human potential and architecting team effectiveness.
The career arc motivation is particularly interesting from a strategic standpoint. Engineers who are targeting executive roles, director, VP, CTO positions, or who want to found companies, recognize that the management toolkit is essential for those paths. They're essentially investing in skills that won't pay off immediately, but are necessary for their long-term career vision.
And then there's a more honest motivation that doesn't get discussed as much: burnout and natural fit. Some engineers candidly admitted they were burnt out on the grind of delivery or found themselves already doing coordination and unblocking work as senior ICs. For these people, formalizing the management role brought clarity and alignment between their actual work and their job description.
This is crucial because it suggests that for some engineers, the transition to management isn't really a choice between two equally appealing paths. It's recognition that they're already functioning as informal managers and want the tools and authority to do that work effectively.
Now, we need to talk about something that's absolutely normal but often treated as failure: the pendulum swing back to IC roles. The data shows that plenty of people try management and return to individual contribution, often without a pay penalty and sometimes with a raise.
The return stories are particularly enlightening. People described going back to IC roles and making more money, often receiving bonuses post-switch. But more importantly, many reported that the management detour made them significantly better individual contributors because they understood the unseen work and collaborated more effectively with their managers.
Think of it as cross-training that makes you more valuable regardless of which role you end up in. A software engineer who has managed a team understands project constraints, resource allocation, and stakeholder management in ways that pure IC experience doesn't provide. They become more effective partners to their managers and more valuable team members overall.
This challenges the traditional view of career changes as permanent commitments. The management experience becomes a broader skill set that enhances value in either path. It's not a failed experiment if you return to IC work, it's career development that increases your effectiveness and market value.
The key insight here is that the decision to try management shouldn't be viewed through a binary success or failure lens. The experience itself has value, and the optionality to return to IC work with enhanced skills and perspective makes the risk much more manageable than traditional career change narratives suggest.
What emerges from all these stories is a complex decision matrix where immediate financial incentives play a surprisingly small role. The engineers who thrive in management seem to be motivated by the desire to solve different types of problems, influence broader outcomes, and develop new skill sets, rather than seeking immediate compensation increases.
And this brings us full circle to the importance of honest self-assessment before making the switch. If your primary motivation is financial, the data suggests you might be disappointed, at least in the short term. But if you're drawn to the work itself, the conversations, coaching, strategic thinking, and system building, then the compensation will likely follow as you develop expertise and advance in the management track.
The most successful transitions seem to happen when people are attracted to the actual work of management rather than just the idea of career advancement. Those who stay in management long-term consistently describe falling in love with enabling others to do their best work, rather than focusing on their own individual output.
As we wrap up today's discussion, it's worth noting that these compensation and motivation patterns provide crucial context for the broader themes we've been exploring throughout this series. The transition to engineering management is fundamentally about changing what type of problems you want to solve and how you want to create impact, with compensation being a secondary consideration that becomes more favorable over time.
Looking ahead to our next episode, we'll be synthesizing all these individual stories and patterns into broader closing patterns. What all these experiences add up to when we view the IC to EM transition as a whole. We'll explore why this really is a new career rather than a promotion, how technical credibility evolves in management roles, and what advice emerges for engineers considering this path.
That's right. We'll be pulling together all the threads we've discussed, from the initial decision-making process through the challenges, preparation strategies, and now the compensation and motivation realities to understand the complete picture of what this career transition really entails and how to approach it strategically.
Until then, thanks for joining us on Beyond the Pull Request, navigating the shift to engineering manager. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time. Welcome back to Beyond the Pull Request, navigating the shift to engineering manager. I'm Steven, and with me is my co-host Edith. We've spent 5 episodes diving deep into the real stories of engineers who made the transition from individual contributor to engineering manager. We've explored the messy reality of daily work, the unexpected challenges, the relationship dynamics, and just last episode, the complex truth about compensation and what actually motivates people to make this leap.
And what we've discovered is that every story we've heard contains threads that, when woven together, reveal some striking patterns. Today, we're stepping back to see the bigger picture. What do all these narratives actually tell us about this career transition?
Exactly. In this final episode, we'll be examining the closing patterns that emerge from these collective experiences. We'll discuss why this transition feels like starting a completely new career rather than a promotion, how the work becomes fundamentally invisible by design, the evolving role of technical credibility, and the realistic compensation trajectory most people can expect.
These patterns matter because they help us separate the myths from reality. Too many engineers go into management with expectations shaped by traditional corporate hierarchies or surface-level advice, only to find themselves completely unprepared for what the role actually demands.
Let's start with perhaps the most fundamental pattern we've observed. This isn't really a promotion in the traditional sense. Can you unpack what makes this transition feel so different from other career moves?
When most people think of a promotion, they imagine building on their existing skills, maybe taking on bigger projects, leading more complex initiatives, but essentially doing more of what they already know how to do well. The IC to EM transition breaks that model entirely. Think about it like a master craftsperson who spent years perfecting their ability to create beautiful, intricate objects, suddenly being asked to run the workshop instead.
That's a powerful analogy, and the data backs this up. Most people report that first 6 to 12 months feeling completely disorienting.
Exactly. Your instincts, which served you so well as an engineer, can actually work against you. The urge to jump in and fix the code when you see a problem, that's now counterproductive. The satisfaction of solving a complex technical challenge in isolation, that dopamine hit is largely gone. Instead, you're dealing with ambiguous people problems, navigating competing priorities, and trying to influence outcomes through others rather than direct action.
This explains why so many of the stories we've heard include that initial period of feeling lost or incompetent. It's not imposter syndrome in the traditional sense, it's the rational response to having your core competencies suddenly become less relevant.
Right, and this is why building support structures on day one becomes so critical. Unlike technical skills where you can often figure things out through documentation and experimentation, management requires learning from other people's experiences. The engineers who struggle most are those who try to lone wolf their way through the transition.
Which brings us to the second major pattern, the fundamental invisibility of management work. This seems to be one of the hardest adjustments for engineers who are used to concrete, measurable outputs.
This invisibility operates on multiple levels, and it's really by design rather than accident. Think of an engineering manager like a film director. The audience sees the final movie, but they don't see all the work that went into preventing the 1,000 small disasters that could have derailed production. The best directors make it look effortless, but that's precisely because they've handled all the complexity behind the scenes.
And unlike code commits or features shipped, you can't point to a line in GitHub and say, I prevented this team from burning out, or I stopped this project from going off the rails.
Exactly. Your biggest successes as a manager are often things that didn't happen. The team member who didn't quit because you had the right conversation at the right time. The project that didn't fail because you identified the risk early and adjusted course. The technical debt that didn't accumulate because you influenced the team's practices. These wins are real and valuable, but they're inherently counterfactual.
This creates an interesting psychological challenge. Engineers are used to the satisfying feedback loop of writing code, seeing it work, and knowing they've created something tangible. How do successful managers adapt to this new reality?
The ones who thrive learn to find satisfaction in different kinds of evidence. They start measuring success through their team's growth, their ability to tackle increasingly complex challenges, the quality of technical decisions being made, and the overall health of the delivery process. It's like shifting from being a sculptor who shapes stone directly to being someone who cultivates the conditions for an entire artist colony to flourish.
That segues perfectly into our third pattern, how technical credibility evolves in the management role. This seems to be one of the most misunderstood aspects of the transition.
This is where we see a crucial distinction emerge from the stories. Technical credibility absolutely still matters, but the way you demonstrate and apply it changes completely. It's no longer about being the person who can solve the hardest problems or ship the most code. Instead, it's about asking the right technical questions, helping the team make sound architectural decisions, and understanding the technical implications of business choices well enough to represent engineering concerns accurately.
So you're shifting from being the person with all the answers to being the person who knows what questions need to be asked?
Exactly. Think of it like the difference between being a master chef and being a food critic. The critic might not be able to execute every technique perfectly, but they have the palate and knowledge to recognize good technique, spot problems, and guide others toward better outcomes. The most effective engineering managers we heard about maintained their technical judgment while resisting the urge to jump in and code solutions themselves.
This seems to be where a lot of new managers stumble. They either try to maintain their hands-on heroics, which creates bottlenecks and undermines their team, or they swing too far in the other direction and lose technical credibility entirely.
Right, and the sweet spot is what several people described as technical leadership without individual contribution. You're still deeply involved in technical decisions, still reviewing architectures and understanding systems, but you're influencing outcomes through coaching, questioning, and system building rather than direct implementation.
Now let's address the elephant in the room, compensation. Last episode, we covered what people actually experienced, but what pattern does this create for someone considering the transition?
The compensation pattern is probably the most sobering reality check in all of our research. The typical story goes like this. You accept a modest internal raise, often just 5 to 10%, to get the title and experience. This rarely feels commensurate with the increased stress and responsibility. The meaningful financial upside usually comes later, either through an external move after you have management experience or by progressing to senior manager or director level.
This directly contradicts the traditional promotion narrative where more responsibility equals significantly more money immediately.
Exactly. And this is partly because many senior ICs, especially at the staff or principal level, are already earning competitive salaries. The management track doesn't immediately differentiate itself financially until you get several levels up the hierarchy. It's like switching from being a highly paid specialist to being an entry-level generalist. The financial progression has to rebuild from a different foundation.
Several people mentioned this two-step approach. Take the internal promotion for experience, then move externally for the real compensation bump. This suggests people should be very clear about their motivations before making the switch.
Absolutely. If the primary driver is immediate financial gain, the transition is likely to disappoint. The people who seemed most satisfied were those drawn to the actual work of management, the coaching, the strategic thinking, the organizational challenges. The money followed eventually, but it wasn't the primary motivator.
This brings us to our final pattern, the idea of trying management without trapping yourself. What does this look like in practice?
This might be the most practical insight from all the stories we've heard. There are several low-risk ways to test your fit for management work before making the full commitment. Tech lead roles, interim management stints, mentoring junior developers, or taking on hiring and onboarding responsibilities. These give you exposure to the core activities, coaching, prioritizing, facilitating decisions, without the formal career commitment.
And importantly, we heard multiple stories of people who tried management, returned to IC roles, and found themselves better engineers as a result.
That's such a crucial point. There's no shame or career penalty in discovering that management isn't for you. In fact, several people described how their management experience made them more effective ICs because they better understood the broader organizational context, could collaborate more effectively with their managers, and had developed better communication and influencing skills.
So the pendulum swing between IC and management roles seems to be not just normal, but potentially beneficial for career development overall.
Exactly. It's like learning a second language. Even if you ultimately choose to communicate primarily in your native tongue, the experience of learning another language deepens your understanding of both. Engineers who spend time in management often return to technical roles with a much richer perspective on how their work fits into larger organizational goals.
As we wrap up this series, what would you say is the most important takeaway for engineers considering this transition?
I think the most honest advice from all these stories is deceptively simple. Decide based on the work you want to do every day, not the title or external perception of career advancement. If you're excited about having conversations about career growth, if you find energy in helping others solve problems rather than solving them yourself, if you're curious about organizational design and strategy, those are the signals that management might be a good fit.
And conversely, if you're primarily motivated by advancing your technical skills, working on challenging problems, or having deep focus time for complex work, the IC track offers a perfectly respectable and often very lucrative alternative.
Right. The best engineering managers we heard about genuinely fell in love with creating the conditions for other people to do the best work of their careers. That's a very specific kind of satisfaction that not everyone finds fulfilling, and that's completely fine.
One thing that struck me throughout this series is how many people emphasized that both tracks, IC and management, are essential and valuable. It's not about one being superior to the other.
Absolutely. High-performing engineering organizations need both brilliant individual contributors who can tackle the hardest technical challenges and skilled managers who can create the environment where those ICs can be most effective. The tension comes when we treat management as the default path for career advancement rather than recognizing it as a specialized role with its own distinct skill set.
For our listeners who are still on the fence, what final piece of advice would you offer?
Start experimenting now, before you have to make the formal decision. Volunteer to mentor someone, take on a small hiring project, or propose leading a cross-team initiative. Pay attention to whether these activities energize you or drain you, and talk to managers you respect, not just about the highlights, but about the day-to-day reality. The more data points you have about your own reactions to management work, the better your eventual decision will be.
And remember that this decision isn't permanent or irreversible. The career paths are more fluid than they used to be, and the skills you develop in either direction often complement each other in valuable ways.
That's been one of the most encouraging patterns from all these stories. The recognition that career development doesn't have to be linear or permanent. You can try things, learn from them, and adjust course based on what you discover about yourself and what energizes you.
Thank you to everyone who shared their stories with us throughout this series. The honesty and vulnerability of these experiences has created a much more nuanced picture of this transition than any theoretical framework could provide.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey. Whether you ultimately choose to stay on the IC track, make the transition to management, or find some hybrid path that works for you, we hope these stories have given you a more realistic foundation for that decision.
This has been Beyond the Pull Request, navigating the shift to engineering manager. Until next time, keep building, keep learning, and remember that the best career path is the one that aligns with the work you actually want to do.
Thanks for listening, everyone.